All right, so now let's talk about biomolecules. This is one of the more so far that we've covered so far is going to be a little bit more in depth, just because we're going to be talking about molecules and chemistry. So if you've taken chemistry before, this may help you out a little bit. But if not, don't worry. We're going to talk about it in detail, so you'll kind of know what it is that we're talking about, right? Remember, y'all, when we talk about molecules. Basically, molecules are like you see right here, right? They're different atoms or chemicals put together, right? So we're going to focus on four biomolecules. And remember, the word bio means living, right? So these are all of the molecules that living things have, right? And if you want to think about it in another way, your cell, remember that your cells are living things, right? And your cells are made up of basic building blocks. And these right here, the carbohydrates, the lipids, the proteins, the nucleic acids, these are all part of the things that your cells are made out of. But at the same time, these are all things that you eat, right? You may have noticed these and been like, hey, carbohydrates, proteins, we eat those things. Yeah, you eat those things so that it can get broken down into these pieces. And then your cells or your body can use these biomolecules to build other things, right? So, like if you're trying to work out and build muscle, you're going to have to eat a lot of protein because your muscles are made of protein. And so, to get the basic building blocks that make up big muscles, you need to eat a lot of protein, like chicken and fish and things like that. That's why you'll see like bodybuilders like The Rock or other, people that lift weights and are huge. They'll eat like 3 or 4 chickens in one meal so that they can get that protein. Right. So carbohydrates are just types of sugars. Lipids right here are fats. Proteins are the basic are what you need in muscle. You find a muscle, your hair is made of protein, your nails are made of protein. A lot of things in your body are made of proteins, right? They call them what they call enzymes, which are part of proteins, like the workhorses of your body. And then nucleic acids right here, these are like your DNA, right? And you don't really think about it, but you do actually eat the DNA of animals and plants and things like that. If you're eating a plant or a fruit, you're eating their cells, you're also eating their DNA, right? Same things with cows and if you eat beef and those kinds of things, right? So again, they are what your cells are made out of, but they're also the things that you eat, right? And it's funny because they say you are what you eat, and that kind of makes a little bit of sense, right? Now that you know this. And so organic compounds, basically, organic compounds have a carbon in it, right? Carbon is one of the elements that we have on our periodic table. And carbon is just, if something is organic, it means it has carbon in it, right? So if it contains carbon, those compounds are called organic. And so biomolecules are large organic molecules. And if y'all have ever watched like science fiction movies, they'll say like, "Oh, carbon-based life forms," and that's what we are. We are carbon-based life forms, and it's because we have carbon in a lot of the molecules that make up our body and all living things. Right. So, what are biomolecules? Cells and their organelles are made up of smaller building blocks called biomolecules. And that's what I was just saying, right? It's what makes up your cell. And if you think about it, it's funny because when you eat a sandwich, your body basically breaks that sandwich down so that your cell can eat that sandwich. Because cells also eat, right? That's they eat and they drink and they release waste. And so cells are living things. Cells and their organelles. And we haven't really talked about organelles, but those are just kind of like the little organs of cells. The way our organs are like our heart, our brain, our lungs, those kinds of things. Cells also have little organs like that help it survive, right? And they're all made up of these biomolecules. So there are four basic types of biomolecules, right? And this is what we're going to learn about. There are carbohydrates, which are the sugars, lipids, which are the fats, proteins, which are what make up muscle, hair, nails, hormones. All of these things in your body are made of proteins. And those things you'll find like when you eat chicken, fish, those kinds of things, they're heavy in protein. Nucleic acids are things like DNA, something else called RNA, which we haven't talked about yet, and ATP, which is like the little energy molecules where we get our energy from when we eat food. And so the thing to remember, y'all, that's a little bit, I don't know if it's confusing, but you're going to have to remember these for all of the biomolecules. So each one is called a polymer, right? So if you have right here, let me go back to this guy over here at the beginning. If you have this right here, like this nucleic acid, right? You see the nucleic acid right there? This is a monomer, right? It's like a chain of something. Sorry, this is a polymer. Poly means many. If someone is a polygamist, if they're a polygamist, it means that they have multiple husbands or multiple wives, right? If someone is a monogamist, it means they just have one husband or one wife. So poly means many, right? A polytheist is someone that believes in many gods. A monotheist is someone that just believes in one God, right? So poly means many, mono means one. So this right here is a polymer, right? Poly, because there are many of them right here in a chain. But if you're just looking at one, right? So if you just took this guy right here, and let me just circle it, and you're just looking at this one right here, this is a monomer, right? Same thing right here. This is one monomer, right? And right here, you could say right here, this is one monomer. Again, mono means one, so it's just one little piece of that chain, right? But when you are talking about all of them in a long chain, that is a polymer. Poly means many, so this right here is a polymer, right? This right here is a polymer. This one right here is a polymer. And again, poly means many, right? So biomolecules are actually made up of even smaller subunits, right? So those little individual ones that I was circling, those subunits are called a monomer, right? So a macromolecule, y'all, is just a big molecule. Macro means big, and a molecule, we talked about that. It's just like more than two different chemicals kind of connected to each other, and they can be the same chemical and atom, right? So each subunit of a macromolecule is called a monomer, right? So mono means one. It's just one little piece of a bigger chain. The biomolecules themselves are called polymers because they are made up of many of these subunits, right? So right here, again, you have the word mono meaning one, and then you have the word poly right here meaning, and let me actually spell that out, many. Right, so mono means one, poly means many. And they are made up of many of these subunits. So again, monomers are the little basic building blocks, but if you if you line up a bunch of them together and you chain them up in a big chain, then that becomes a polymer. Right, and here you have that example right here, right? This long thing down here is the chain. It's made up of a bunch of these little monomers, right? So right here, I'll put an M for monomer, an M for monomer. And so these are all monomers. But here's the thing, y'all, that I think does make this part a little bit confusing, is that now you got to remember that carbohydrates are a polymer. Nucleic acids are a polymer. Lipids, carbohydrates are all polymers, right? But each one is called something different. Each polymer is something different, and each monomer is called something different. So we'll see that right now. But remember, for now, the main thing to remember right now is that these long chains, these long polymer chains, are made up of individual monomers, right? So mono, one, poly means many. Right. And so this is right here. And y'all, I know I repeat myself, but that's on purpose, right? You might get tired of hearing these things, but if you're getting to that point, that means it's probably getting stuck in your head, right? And that's what we want. So even though I am repeating myself, it's on purpose so that it sinks into your brain and kind of sticks to your brain. All right. So how are biomolecules formed? Right. There's two different processes. One is called dehydration synthesis. And so let me just kind of drag this down a little bit. And dehydration, if you are dehydrated, that means that you need water, right? That means you don't have any water. If you dehydrate something, that means you're taking the water out of it. Like if you've ever had beef jerky before, that's that beef jerky like that you buy in the bags at the stores, like when you're checking out. That beef jerky is basically dehydrated meat, right? They dehydrate, they take all of the moisture out of it, and they even leave packets of salt in there. I don't know if you've ever seen that before when you bought a bag of beef jerky, but there's a little packet of salt there that keeps it dry. You do not want to get any water in that. You want to dehydrate it, right? Take all the water out. So when you're talking about dehydration, you are removing water. And that's what's happening, y'all, in these polymers. So these polymers, again, are made up of long chains, right? But in between these chains right here, you have little connections right here. And there is let me see right here. Let me circle this. There is a hydrogen here and a hydrogen here, right? So if you have those two hydrogens right there, you can write it like this, H2. And if you have an O right there, then you can also put the O right here. And that gives you H2O, right? H2O is water. And so when you are have these two separate ones, right? So again, we were talking about dehydration means to remove water. But synthesis right here, it basically means to build, right? When you synthesize something, you build or you create something, right? So that's what's happening here is you're creating right here. You have these two separate things, right? You have these, let me circle these guys right here. You have these and you have these right here, right? But you want to connect them into one long chain. So here you have a monomer. Let me just put an M here. This is one monomer. This is another monomer. And this is another monomer. And so you basically want to connect these two monomers to this one to keep making like a long chain of whatever we have here, right? So we haven't specified if these are carbohydrates, lipids, any. We're just it's just a general polymer, right? Just a general one. So what it's saying right here is you have an M and an M, a monomer and a monomer, and you want to connect it to this other monomer so that you can get this long chain right here, right? You want to keep making more and more and more so that you get a really long chain. So what this is saying, dehydration synthesis, is you're going to remove the water, right? Actually, they're showing it to you down here. You're going to remove the water so that these two connect, because right here it's keep preventing them from connecting to each other, right? These right here will not connect with these. The H will not connect to the HO. And so these will stay separate until you remove the water, right? Right here, there you remove the water. And by doing so, now you can connect these with each other, right? And so now you went from a monomer and then the separate one to now you have this polymer, right? So that's what it's saying. Dehydration synthesis, you remove a little drop, you remove a water molecule to connect them together, right? So you went from monomers, but when you remove the water there, they connected together. So that is dehydration synthesis. Again, you remove water to build something, to create something. Right? So how are they separated or digested, right? That is creating or building something. But what is the opposite, right? Where do you want to go? The picture we just saw right here was going from monomers into a polymer, right? So from individual ones into a long chain. And so here it's like, well, what is the opposite of that? How do we do the opposite, right? How, when we eat something like a carbohydrate, right? How do we break that down? How does a long chain of carbohydrates break down into little individual monomers of sugars, right? Because carbohydrates are long, they can be long chains of sugars, like starch, right? If you eat a potato, if you eat noodles, those are long carbohydrates, long chains. But how do we turn those long chains of sugars into little sugars so that we can fuel our body, right? So let's look at that right here. It's kind of going to be the opposite, right? In the last one, we did dehydration synthesis to we removed water, dehydration synthesis, to build a polymer, right? But this, we're kind of doing the reverse. So now we have this long polymer, but we don't want a long polymer. We want to break down that polymer into little sugars that our body can use, right? So the way we do that is through hydrolysis. So right here, let me underline this word. Hydro basically means, let me write that right there, water. Or let me just circle this right here, water. Lysis right here basically means to break down, right? If you've ever heard of Lysol, that spray, the disinfectant spray, that Lysol is supposed to break open the cells of like harmful bacteria in that. So whenever you hear lysis, it's kind of like you're breaking something down. So this right here means that you're basically breaking down those polymers by adding water to it. Whenever I think of hydrolysis, I usually think of like scissors made out of water, and that always just kind of stuck in my head because this water right here is going to separate. So let me see. Let me click on this. And so this right here, you see, you have this H2O, right? And in here, it's because there is H2O right here. We saw that you have the H and the OH. Sorry, it's not very pretty, H and OH. And so these right here are connected, right? But when you remove this, you get rid of this H2O, then all of a sudden, these, I'm sorry, I had that backwards. One second, let me erase this really quick. Right, so here you have, you don't have that. All right, so here you see you have the polymer, right? A chain right here, polymer. And so if we want to separate these, we're kind of doing the reverse of what we did earlier, right? What we did earlier right here is that we remove this water, and when we remove that, the monomers connected to each other, right? But that was removing the water. So we're going to kind of do the reverse here, and we are going to add water to this. And when you add the water to this, right, this H2O, you see here you have one H, the other H. Let me erase that. And here you have that O, right? So by putting in that water molecule, H2O, now you have separated that long chain into individual monomers, right? And if you were to insert right here, Right? If you were to insert this H2O molecule right here, then you would also separate these two purple monomers, and you would have one monomer here and then another monomer here. Right? So remember, y'all, hydrolysis, you add water to turn that from a polymer into a monomer, right? To break it down. And so this is what happens when you eat, right? You eat, you definitely need water in your body, and it's going to help with like digestion and things like that. But that's what's happening is you're breaking down these long chains of sugars or proteins into little building blocks, into monomers, right? Dehydration is to synthesize to make long chains, and hydrolysis is to break down long chains. Right, so name of the four biomolecules. So make sure that you know these, right? Make sure that you know the basic shape, especially of carbohydrates and lipids. Name of the monomers for each one, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Function, what are they all used for, right? I kind of mentioned a little bit of a few of them, but what else? And food sources, what foods will you find these in? Again, kind of mentioned a little bit, touched on it, but we'll get into more detail. So let's start with the carbohydrates. When you're talking about the carbohydrates, and I'll put right here at the bottom, whenever you're thinking of carbohydrates, y'all, these are known as the sugars. I'll put that right here. So carbohydrates are sugars, right? And simple sugars, y'all, when something tastes sweet, it's because there are simple sugars like this. Let me just pretend this is a sugar right here. If it is a simple sugar like this, it's going to taste sweet, right? But if you have long chains, and I don't want to make it super long just because it's going to take a while, so I'm just going to put a few here, a few here, a few here. And if this was like a chain, it would just keep going and going and going of carbohydrates. But this is like a simple sugar right here. And when you have a super long chain, this is like a starch. Right? And then there are actually some other really long chains of carbohydrates that are super sturdy. They're very, very sturdy. And those are called chitin. And chitin, but it's kind of pronounced, it's spelled with a CH, but it is pronounced chitin. And so chitin right here, these are like the things that make the outside of an insect, right? So when you step on a cockroach and it kind of crunches, that crunch sound is a chitin being broken, right? And that is some very tough stuff right there, that chitin. But anyways, these are sugars, right? Even trees are made out of sugars. And that for trees, like the stuff that wood and all of that stuff is known as, and I can't drag this up, cellulose. Right, so these are all different kinds of sugars, and let me just kind of organize it a little bit better. Right, and so here again, just different examples of carbohydrates. Right, but the simple sugars that you taste like this, they taste sweet. But once you have long chains, like if you eat a potato or if you eat a noodle, spaghetti noodle or something, it's not going to taste very sweet, right? So, there's a big difference whether it's a simple sugar or like a long chain of sugars. And so here's the structure. Oops, let me close this down. And so carbohydrates are made up of monomers. A monomer is just a basic unit, right? The rings are called simple sugars or monosaccharide. Whenever you see the word right here, mono, again, it just means one, right? Monomer means one. Saccharide, when you see this word right here, that means sugars, right? So let me write that here. Saccharide are sugars. So let me put it right underneath it right here. Oops, I just tried to make it a little bit closer to that. And so, yeah, mono means one, saccharide is sugar. So it's just one sugar. And an example of that is glucose. And this is underlined right here, y'all. Whenever you see the letters OSE at the end of something, then that's a good sign that is a sugar, right? Glucose, fructose, galactose, lactose, and milk, those are all sugars, right? So OSE is a good sign that something is a sugar. So that's just one building block right here, monosaccharide. So remember, y'all, I told you that each polymer has a monomer. So in the case of sugars, the long chain right here that you see at the bottom is called a polysaccharide. But the one individual monomer for that is called a monosaccharide. Right, so mono is one. You see there's just one right here. But then down here, a polymer, a chain of these complex carbohydrates, is called a polysaccharide. So monosaccharide is the monomer, and polysaccharide is a polymer for sugar, for carbohydrates. right? And here are some of the things I mentioned earlier. Starch, you will find that in like in foods, right? So if you have like a lot of like a race coming up or a marathon. I remember when I used to play football in high school, we used to have a spaghetti dinner like the Thursday before games, right? And that was because you were supposed to have all those carbohydrates or all that starch before the day before, right? To have that energy the next day. Cellulose right here, you see it ends in OSE. That is the polysaccharides that make wood, right? So wood, you can't really eat that. You won't really get very much nutrition out of it because those the polysaccharides are very close together. They're packed in very tight, so you really won't be able to break those down. Right? It's only termites that can do that, but not even the termite itself. It's like this little microscopic thing living inside the termite's stomach that breaks down that wood. Chitin, I mentioned to you all that chitin is something that you find in like insects and in fungus and things like that. It's what makes the skin or the skeleton of that. And then glycogen are just sugars that you find in like animals. And so right here again, you see the monomer for carbohydrates is a polysaccharide. The highlight that right here. The polysaccharide, the polymer for carbohydrates is a polysaccharide. So monomer is monosaccharide, polymer is polysaccharide for carbohydrates, right? It changes for each one. And so here you see some examples of carbohydrates function. So when it gets broken down, this is what I was saying before, it provides your body with energy. So what should you eat before playing the big game? Candy bar or pasta? Y'all, that candy bar are simple sugars, right? That's why they taste sweet. So if you need a quick boost really fast, then yeah, you might want to eat a candy bar. But if you have a big game or some event where you're going to be like hiking for hours and things like that, then yeah, you're going to want to eat some complex carbohydrates like starch right here because you're going to have this long-term storage. And as the hours go by, it's just slowly going to start breaking them down, right? Breaking it down, breaking it down. And then right here for these, you'll be able to use them long term, right? The candy bar, like I said, contains simple sugars, but just that short burst of energy. The pasta contains starch, which takes longer to break down, and it provides you longer lasting energy, right? So again, if you need something quick, you haven't eaten forever, and your stomach is growling, and you just need some quick energy. Yeah, something sweet, right? But if you have that long journey, that long some kind of very active event coming, then yeah, you want that long term energy. So we can't digest cellulose. It's what I was saying earlier. It is used as a fiber or roughage instead, right? So it's not to say that you shouldn't eat things that have cellulose because it is good to eat fiber because what happens is that fiber, it doesn't get broken down. It stays like that. And so when it goes through your body, it kind of cleans out your insides. It scrubs them down. It cleans off a lot of the stuff that's there. And so that's why they say have some fiber in your diet because it kind of helps clean out your insides when you eat it, right? Roughage is what it's also known as. And some examples here are like corn. And so food sources, simple carbs, simple sugars are found in most candy, sweet drinks, fruit, vegetables, and milk. So anything that tastes sweet, right? That is going to have simple sugars. And if you think about lactose milk, right? Or milk has lactose in it. And someone who is lactose intolerant, they cannot break down that lactose sugar. So the sugar stays together. But when you have milk that's just regular milk, it has a taste to it. But when you taste lactose-free milk, right, milk that doesn't have lactose, that means that they put a protein in the milk, and that protein already broke apart that sugar, that lactose sugar, so it doesn't mess up your stomach when you drink lactose-free milk. But the thing, though, is that the lactose-free milk tastes sweeter because that lactose sugar has already been broken in half, so it's an even simpler sugar, right? So that's why lactose-free milk will taste sweeter than regular milk. Right, but these sweet things, right? These simple carbs, they're quickly digested and give you a short burst of energy, right? So they're good for just short bursts of energy, but if it's long term, remember you want to stick to these complex carbs like starches. You find them in pasta, breads, potatoes, legumes, which are like beans, and corn, right? They take longer to digest and provide energy for longer periods of time. So again, if you have a race coming, a marathon, if you're just going to go hiking, maybe you're going to be at the beach all day, something like that, then eat a lot of complex carbs to keep your long-term energy going. Right. And so, yeah, again, these are like breads, pastas, potatoes, and things like that.